From the very first day I met Vivian, she looked at me the way someone looks at a stain on an expensive blouse. Quiet disapproval, masked as politeness. She shook my hand, smiled without warmth, and made a comment about my humble charm. I should have known then what the years would look like. Vivian was a woman of polish and pride. She'd worked her way up in the corporate world and wore her ambition like a badge of honor. She loved expensive tableware, dinner parties with power couples, and weekend spa retreats. Her world was clean, organized, and curated, and I never fit in. She never directly said I wasn't good enough for her son, but she never had to. The way she spoke about the kind of women Nathan could have married, or the way she always offered unsolicited advice on how I should dress, speak, or carry myself in public, it all said enough. And Nathan? He tried to smooth things over, told me she didn't mean it that way, but deep down he knew. What cut the most was that she never once asked about my family. In the 10 years I'd been part of their lives, she never showed any interest in who raised me, where I came from, or what my parents were like. She simply assumed they were nobodies. And if I ever mentioned them, she changed the subject, fast. Vivian liked control. And her son's life, our life, was something she liked to believe she still had a say in. She'd plan our holidays, critique our decisions, and treat me like a guest in my own marriage. Over time, I learned to keep my distance. I smiled when I had to. I nodded through her condescending compliments. I built a quiet wall between us, brick by brick, to protect my dignity. But I never forgot the way she made me feel. Small, misplaced, and invisible. What she didn't know was that my parents had stories worth telling. My father may have worked under car hoods instead of boardroom ceilings, but he had a wisdom that came from surviving hardship. My mother didn't wear pearls or silk scarves, but she knew how to make a home feel like safety. They may not have had money, but they had strength. Vivian never cared to ask, and for a long time I let her ignorance go unchecked. But not forever. Nathan came home that Thursday evening, humming, unusually upbeat. It was rare for him to walk through the door with anything more than a tired sigh. I watched him hang his blazer, loosen his tie, and pour himself a drink before he turned to me and said, "Mom got the regional VP position. It's official." He smiled like a proud son. I nodded, keeping my face neutral. I already knew it would be followed by an invitation, or more likely, a summons. "She's throwing a dinner this Saturday at LaRue. It's going to be a big deal. Clients, colleagues, a few family friends. Very elegant." He paused. "She'd prefer it to stay formal. No extra guests." There it was. No extra guests, meaning no parents. Mine, specifically. I just stared at him for a second and said, "All right." I didn't argue. I didn't remind him that my parents had never been invited to anything, not even our own wedding reception. I didn't say that I had seen my mother cry after receiving a wedding invitation with only her daughter's name on it. I didn't need to. I had heard all of Vivian's justifications before. Small venue, professional crowd. We didn't know them well enough. As if my family was a footnote in my life. Later that night, I couldn't sleep. Something was pressing on me, heavy and urgent. Maybe it was exhaustion. Maybe it was resentment. Maybe it was time. I got up and walked into the hallway. I had a vague memory that Nathan once mentioned the name of the firm where Vivian worked, but I'd never really paid attention before. He'd said it in passing some years ago, during a call she was on speaker for. Wellington and Howe. I opened my laptop and typed it in. A large consulting and investment firm based downtown, with offices in New York and Boston. Their homepage boasted strategic planning, asset growth, and elite clients. I clicked through the leadership bios, and sure enough, there she was, Vivian Porter, Vice President, Regional Strategy. But what caught my eye wasn't her profile. It was the names listed on the board of executive ownership. I froze when I saw the first name, Thomas Hill, my father, and then the second, Linda Hill, my mother. For a second, I couldn't breathe. I thought it had to be a coincidence. I clicked on each profile, my hands trembling, but it wasn't. It was them. Their photos were smaller, professionally done, but it was them. My parents. My modest, unassuming parents. Co-owners of a firm Vivian had worked at for 23 years. I felt hot, then cold, then something in between. All this time she'd looked down on them, had never asked their names, never once wondered where I came from. She had buried herself in hierarchy in the belief that she stood above others and had no idea who signed her paycheck. And my parents had never said a word. I shut the laptop and stared at the blank screen. Suddenly, the humiliation, the exclusion, the way she sneered every time my parents were mentioned, it all felt different. Like something rotten under the surface was about to come to light, and I wasn't going to keep quiet anymore. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed beside Nathan, who snored softly, unaware that the ground beneath our marriage had shifted. I kept replaying it in my mind. My mother's gentle voice on the phone when I told her about the promotion dinner, how she said, "That's lovely. We're so happy for her," knowing full well she wouldn't be invited. And yet, she never once mentioned the company. Never even hinted. I waited until the next morning to make the call. My parents answered on speaker. They were having coffee together like they always did. I didn't waste time. "Why didn't you tell me?" I asked, skipping the greetings. "About Wellington and how?" There was a pause. "Darling," my mother said softly, "we didn't think it mattered. We never wanted you to feel like you had to prove anything." "But you're co-owners," I said. "She works for you." "She works for the firm," my father corrected gently. "It's not personal." "It is now," I said. "You don't know how she's treated you all these years. You've been nothing to her. Nothing. And now, this is an opportunity. I want you to come with me." Another pause. "To the dinner," I added. "She needs to know. She needs to hear it. From you." My mother hesitated. "Honey, we never wanted to play those kinds of games." "This isn't a game," I said, my voice tight. "This is about respect. She's made me feel ashamed of you since the day I married Nathan. Maybe if she finally learns the truth, she'll stop looking down on us." "She never even asked who we were," my father said quietly. "Exactly. And maybe it's time she found out." There was a long silence. I could hear a clock ticking faintly in the background. Then my mother said, "All right, if it matters to you, we'll come." That night, I laid out their clothes myself. I found my father's navy suit, still perfectly pressed from a charity event years ago, and took my mother's pearl earrings out of the drawer she rarely opened. I wanted them to feel seen. I wanted them to walk in tall. Nathan didn't know yet. I hadn't told him. Part of me was afraid he'd try to talk me out of it. Part of me didn't trust he'd take my side. He had spent too long bending to his mother's control. I needed this moment to belong to us, me and my parents. The next day, I called LaRue and confirmed 3 seats. No one questioned it. I asked for a quiet note to be made about dietary needs, pretending it was for a colleague's elderly parents. The hostess agreed without pause. As the dinner approached, I rehearsed what I'd say in my head. I pictured the stunned silence, Vivian's expression, the way her face would change when she realized the very people she had looked down on for so long were the ones behind her paycheck. I didn't want revenge. I wanted a shift, a correction. I didn't expect her to apologize. That wasn't her nature. But I hoped that maybe, just maybe, she would see us differently. Maybe then, she'd finally treat my parents with a fraction of the dignity they had always deserved. And me, too. The day of the dinner felt heavier than it should have. I woke up early, even though I'd barely slept, and sat with my coffee until it went cold. There was a weight in my chest I couldn't shake. A tight knot of nerves, expectation, and something close to fear. My parents arrived at noon as planned. My father looked calm, but I could tell he was holding tension in his shoulders. My mother had pressed her dress the night before and wore the pearl earrings I'd left on her pillow. They didn't ask what exactly I hoped to accomplish. They trusted me. "I just want her to look you in the eye," I said quietly as I helped pin a stray curl behind my mother's ear. "To finally see you." "And if she doesn't?" my mother asked gently. I smiled a little. "Then at least she'll know." Nathan was already gone by then. He'd left earlier in the afternoon, saying he had to help his mother with some final details. I watched him leave, standing at the window, wondering if I was doing the right thing. Part of me wanted to call him and tell him the plan. But every time I imagined his reaction, it was the same. Hesitation, discomfort, a half-hearted attempt to talk me out of it. He'd always tried to keep the peace, by asking me to be the one who stayed silent. Not this time. We arrived at LaRue 15 minutes after the official start time. The car ride was quiet. My parents didn't fidget or speak much. They weren't angry or vindictive. They simply carried themselves with the same quiet dignity they always had. Still, I could feel the tension rising as we stepped out into the cool evening air. The maitre d' greeted us warmly and led us down the long corridor to the private dining room. From behind the glass-paneled doors, I could already hear the low hum of conversation, the gentle clink of silverware. I recognized a few voices: Vivian's sharp laugh, Nathan's lighter tone in the background. No one inside had any idea who was about to walk in. I took one last look at my parents before we stepped through. They stood tall, poised, like the room belonged to them. And in a way, it did. As we entered, the sound dimmed for a moment. Heads turned. A few eyes flickered in confusion, unsure of who my parents were. But all I was watching was Vivian. She was seated near the head of the long table, mid-conversation with a man in a suit. When she saw me, her smile barely flickered. But then her gaze shifted. To my mother. Then to my father. Her face froze. It was subtle at first. A tightening of the jaw, a hard blink. Then she stood. Not quickly, not loudly, but deliberately. Her hands gripped the edge of the table, and her lips pressed into a thin line. Her eyes cut through me like knives. She didn't speak right away, but her face said enough. She was furious. And we hadn't even sat down yet. Vivian didn't storm over. She glided, elegant, composed, and rehearsed. Her public face never cracked, even when she was livid. But I saw the fire in her eyes. The way her jaw clenched with every step closer. The way her fingers curled slightly against her manicured palm. This wasn't just irritation. This was personal. She stopped 2 feet from us, her heels clicking sharply against the marble floor, and leaned in ever so slightly toward me. "What are you doing?" she said in a tone so low and sharp it could have been mistaken for a compliment. "What is this?" I didn't flinch. "I brought my parents." Her gaze shifted again, just briefly, to my father and mother, who stood silently, politely, their expressions unreadable. They didn't need to say anything. Their presence said enough. Vivian smiled, but it was the kind of smile people give before closing a door in your face. "This isn't a block party, dear. Your worthless parents were not invited." That word, worthless. My father's nostrils flared. He opened his mouth, but my mother touched his wrist gently. Her voice, when it came, was calm, measured, deadly quiet. "We didn't come for your invitation," she said. "We came to support our daughter." Vivian blinked, stunned for just a second. Then she turned on me again, her voice sharper this time, louder. "This is a private dinner, for professionals, for people who actually understand the corporate world, not cafeteria workers and grease monkeys." The nearby conversations at the table stopped. Glasses paused midair. Heads turned. Everyone was listening now. My father looked at me. "We don't have to stay." But I wasn't ready to back down. "Actually," I said, facing Vivian, "they know this company better than anyone here. Much better than you." That did it. Her smile vanished. Nathan arrived at that moment, appearing at her shoulder, slightly breathless. "What's going on?" he asked, glancing from her to me to my parents. "Why are they here?" Before I could answer, Vivian snapped, "They weren't invited. I told her, and now she's making a scene." "I didn't raise my voice," I said steadily. "But she did call my parents worthless. Again, in front of a room full of your colleagues." Nathan looked at his mother, then at me. And then he did what I'd feared he would do. "Okay," he said, holding up a hand. "Let's not do this here. This is her night. Can we just leave it alone? You know how she gets." I stared at him. "She's insulting my parents." "I'm not saying she's right," he said quickly. "But you know how she is. Just not now, okay?" My father exhaled hard and stepped forward. "I think we've overstayed our welcome." "Dad, no," he said, looking straight at Nathan. "It's clear we're not wanted." My mother touched my hand. "Come on, sweetheart, let's go." I looked back at the room. The eyes on us, the expressions half pitying, half entertained. Nathan still standing between us and his mother like some kind of neutral bystander. Vivian had already turned back toward the table, like the matter had been dealt with. I followed my parents out in silence. And with every step away from that room, The air in my chest got clearer, lighter, but deeper. Somewhere in me, something else was brewing. A different kind of silence. Not the quiet of submission. The kind that comes before the storm. The hallway outside LaRue's private dining room was quiet, almost serene compared to the noise behind us. My parents walked with slow, steady steps, neither of them speaking. I stayed close behind, feeling the weight of what had just happened press harder with each footfall. When we reached the front of the restaurant, my father finally said, "You didn't deserve that." Neither did they. I watched them drive away, swallowed by the red glow of the taillights in the evening traffic. I stood there a while longer before calling for a ride home. I didn't go back inside. I had nothing left to say in that room, not then. But inside, the story wasn't over. Back in the dining room, Vivian had returned to her seat with a smooth flick of her silk scarf and a smirk she didn't try to hide. She was already laughing again with her colleague on the right, as if nothing had happened. A few guests exchanged glances, but no one said anything, until a man seated near the end of the table leaned toward her. "Vivian," he said, clearing his throat. "Forgive me for asking, but was that Thomas Hill and his wife?" Vivian paused mid-sip, wine glass frozen just shy of her lips. "Excuse me? The couple who just left, your daughter-in-law's parents." Her brow furrowed. "Yes," she said slowly. "Why?" The man looked surprised. "You didn't know? That's Thomas Hill, co-owner of the firm, has been for over 15 years. And his wife, Linda. She's on the board of trustees for the foundation. You really didn't know?" Vivian blinked. Her fingers tightened around the stem of the glass. "That's impossible. No, I'm quite sure. I've met them a few times at corporate functions. Lovely people. Quiet, very private, but very much in charge." There was a moment of complete stillness. Vivian's mouth opened slightly as if to speak, but nothing came out. She quickly turned her face away as though afraid someone else at the table might be listening. Too late. The whisper had already spread. 2 chairs down, another guest leaned toward her husband. "That was the Hills? The owners?" The man shrugged. "She called them worthless." Vivian's hands were now trembling slightly. She lowered the wine glass, her lips pressed together so tightly they turned white. She didn't respond, didn't excuse herself, didn't even try to deny it. For the first time in the entire evening, possibly her entire professional life, Vivian Porter had no idea what to say. Nathan, sitting just 2 seats away, finally noticed the sudden change in energy. He leaned over. "Mom?" She didn't look at him. She just sat there staring into her plate, trying to process the reality she had spent years refusing to consider, that the people she had belittled for a decade had more power than she'd ever dreamed of having. And worse, they had remained silent. Until now. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in the living room for hours after I got home, staring at nothing. The events played over in my mind on a loop. Vivian's voice, sharp and loud, the way my mother's face didn't even flinch, the way my father's hand twitched just slightly at his side before he said, "We've overstayed our welcome." And Nathan, asking me to just leave it alone. By morning, I was still in my clothes from the night before. Nathan didn't come home until after sunrise. I heard the door quietly click open and the gentle sound of him removing his shoes. I didn't move. I just waited. He stepped into the living room and stopped when he saw me. "You're up," he said cautiously. I nodded. "Barely." He sighed and ran a hand through his hair. "Look, last night got out of hand." "Did it?" I asked, finally meeting his eyes. He sat down across from me but kept a careful distance. "Mom's not handling it well. She insulted my parents in front of a room full of people." "I know. She called them worthless, again, and you didn't defend me." Nathan looked pained. "I didn't know what to say. You didn't expect them to be powerful?" I snapped. "Because if they were actually worthless, would that have been okay?" Before he could answer, his phone buzzed. He looked at the screen and groaned. "It's Mom," he muttered. "She's been texting me all night." "Let her come," I said coldly. "I'd love to hear what she has to say." He stared at me. "You sure?" I nodded. 20 minutes later, Vivian arrived. She walked in fast, like a woman trying to outrun consequences. Her hair was still styled from the night before, but her face was drawn and pale. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "I can't believe what you did," she snapped, standing in the middle of our living room like it belonged to her. "You humiliated me. Do you have any idea what I'm dealing with today?" "I think you humiliated yourself," I said calmly. "I didn't know who they were," she exploded. "How could I have known? If you'd ever asked, just once, who my parents were, what they did, what kind of people they are, you'd have known. But you never cared enough to ask, not in 10 years. Vivian looked at me like I'd slapped her. "All these years I let your little jab slide. The snide comments, the looks, the fact that you treated me like someone Nathan picked up from a bus stop. You never wanted to know me, and you certainly didn't want to know where I came from." "That's not true," she said, but her voice was thinner now. "Isn't it? Then tell me, what does my father do? What's my mother's favorite book? Where did I go to school before I met Nathan?" She said nothing. I continued, my voice growing steadier. "You looked at them and saw cheap clothes and quiet voices and assumed they had no value. You humiliated them in a room full of people, and you didn't even know they pay your salary." Vivian's cheeks flushed. "That's not fair. I worked for that promotion. I earned it." "I didn't say you didn't," I replied. "But now you're worried you might lose it because you couldn't show an ounce of basic human decency." "I will lose it," she hissed. "The board is already talking. This is going to ruin everything, and it'll all trace back to you." I stood up. "No, it traces back to you, to years of cruelty, to believing you were above everyone else. All I did was walk into a room with the people I love." Vivian's voice trembled. "You could have warned me. I didn't owe you that. You should have known me by now. But you never wanted to." She opened her mouth again, but I was already done listening. I walked past her and left the room. And for the first time in years, I didn't care what she thought of me. Vivian returned the next day. Not humbler, not apologetic, just louder. I heard her voice even before she knocked. She didn't wait to be invited in. She walked through the door like she owned the house. "Nathan," she called out sharply. "Are you home?" I was in the kitchen. Nathan, coming down the stairs in sweatpants, froze the moment he heard her. He looked at me, half apologetic, half bracing for impact. Vivian came into the room with the same fire from the night before, but this time it was edged with panic. "I need to talk to you both," she said. "Now." We sat, though I didn't want to. I folded my arms and waited. Vivian took a deep breath. "I've been up all night. The regional director called me. He said the board has been briefed. Apparently, someone submitted a report this morning outlining the incident at the dinner, and who your parents are." She looked at me, eyes narrowed. "I could lose my job. Do you understand that? After everything I've built, everything I've worked for, I could lose everything because of your little stunt." I didn't respond. She kept going. "They said the board found the whole situation disturbing. They used that word, disturbing, that I publicly insulted executive-level stakeholders. They want an explanation." "You have one," I said coldly. "You called them worthless." "It was a misunderstanding." I laughed, an ugly, bitter sound I couldn't hold in. "You didn't misunderstand anything. You saw them. You judged them, like you always do." "I didn't know who they were," she shouted. "That's not the defense you think it is," I said, standing up. "You never asked. Not once in 10 years. You had every opportunity. You didn't want to know." Vivian's face flushed red. She turned to Nathan, who remained silent, frozen between us. "Are you going to let her talk to me like this?" Nathan opened his mouth, then closed it again. Vivian stepped forward. "I need to make this right. I need them to understand I didn't mean what I said. I was just surprised. I thought they were irrelevant." "You called them a soup kitchen case," I said through gritted teeth. "You looked them in the eye and said they didn't belong. I didn't know." "Vivian," I said slowly, "when someone says something cruel, it doesn't become kinder just because they didn't know how powerful the other person was." She turned away from me, exasperated, and pulled her phone from her bag. "I'm going to call them. I'm going to explain. Maybe if I speak to them directly." I stepped in front of her. You don't get to call them now, not like this. Not because you're scared of losing your job. You don't want forgiveness. You want damage control. I need them to understand, she pleaded. Understand what? That if they were really janitors, you'd still think it was okay to insult them? I asked. She stopped. That's what this is about, Vivian. You didn't make a mistake. You revealed yourself. And now you're terrified that people finally saw the real you. Vivian slumped into the chair, suddenly looking smaller. This isn't fair, she whispered. I've worked too hard to lose it all because of a dinner. I crossed my arms. Then maybe you should have worked harder on how you treat people. There was silence. Then she said something that chilled me. I should have known they weren't ordinary. Your mother was wearing real pearls. I thought she was trying to play pretend. I had no idea they were old money types. My stomach turned. That's how you see people? Jewelry and titles? She didn't answer. I turned to Nathan, whose silence had become unbearable. Well? I asked. You've heard everything. Are you going to say anything? He looked at his mother, then at me, then lowered his head. I think maybe she should talk to them, he said quietly. At least try to explain. It was like a crack down the center of everything I'd tried to hold together. I walked out of the room, and this time I didn't stop at the hallway. The next morning, I went to see my parents. I needed air, space, clarity. But more than that, I needed to sit with the only people who had ever seen me clearly. They welcomed me with quiet smiles, as they always did, and didn't bring up the dinner. Not at first. My mother poured tea. My father was reading a newspaper but put it down the moment I sat. I'm sorry, I said, my throat tight. For everything. For bringing you into that. You didn't bring us into anything, my father said, calm as ever. Vivian brought herself into it. She's been trying to call, I added. She wants to explain herself. Says she didn't know who you were. She didn't want to know, my mother said, folding her hands. There's a difference. I nodded slowly. She says she might lose her job. She's blaming me. They exchanged a brief look. My father finally said, We're not going to retaliate. That's not how we operate. I know, I whispered. We built that company with values she clearly doesn't understand, he continued. But we're not here to humiliate her. We're not interested in revenge. That kind of pettiness doesn't last. She doesn't even realize what she's done, I murmured. She's sorry for the consequences, not the behavior. My mother reached out and touched my hand. And your husband? I was quiet because that was the harder part. I had always thought that even when Nathan didn't speak up, he still saw me. That somehow, his silence was neutrality. But now I realized it wasn't. It never had been. He didn't stay quiet to protect me. He stayed quiet to avoid discomfort. And that silence had allowed his mother's cruelty to fester, unchecked, year after year. I think, I said slowly, I spent a long time telling myself it wasn't that bad, that I could keep the peace. But peace isn't real when one person is bleeding and the other is pretending not to notice. My father nodded, but didn't interrupt. I don't know how I'm supposed to stay married to someone who let this go on for 10 years, who let her treat me like nothing. And then, when it all blew up, his first instinct was to protect her, not me. There was a pause. Then my mother said, gently but firmly, You've spent so long trying to be polite to not make waves, but it's okay to protect yourself now. And for the first time, I allowed myself to consider that maybe walking away wouldn't be a failure. Maybe it would be the first real decision I'd ever made for me. After I left their house, I didn't go home. I sat in my car for over an hour in the grocery store parking lot, replaying everything from the past decade, every cutting remark, every time Nathan looked away, every moment I laughed off the insults just to keep the family together. What kind of family was it, if I was the only one protecting it? That evening, I finally returned to our house. Nathan was there, pacing. He stopped when he saw me and looked like he'd been waiting to talk things through. He started with an apology, a soft, vague one that sounded like it had been rehearsed in front of the mirror. I didn't mean to take her side, he said. I didn't know how to handle it. I know, I replied. That's the problem. He frowned. You don't think I'm trying? I think you never tried enough. We stood in silence, the space between us too wide to fill. I need time, I said, to think about us, about whether this is what I want to keep fighting for. He looked shocked. You're going to throw away 10 years? I didn't throw anything, I said. But I can't keep standing in the same place while you hold the door open for her insults. I'm your husband, he said defensively. You were, I replied softly, but lately it's hard to tell whose side you're on. And then I walked past him, not out of rage, but because it was time. It took 2 days before Nathan finally asked if I would come home. I had been staying at my parents' house, not out of anger, but clarity, the kind that only arrives after you've stopped making excuses for someone else's behavior. The silence between me and Nathan had grown into something weightier than distance. It had become recognition. When I arrived back at the house, he was waiting at the dining table, the same one we had shared 100 quiet dinners at. This time, he stood when he saw me. I've been thinking, he began. About everything. I didn't speak. I let him have the space to say it all. I let you carry the weight alone, he said. For years, I thought staying out of it was the same as keeping peace. But it wasn't. It was cowardice. That startled me. Not the admission, but the honesty of it. I should have defended you, he continued. Not just last week, but every time she rolled her eyes at you, or dismissed your ideas, or pretended your family didn't matter. I looked at him then, trying to gauge if this was another performance. But it didn't feel rehearsed this time. She's my mother, he said, but you're my wife, and I should have remembered that first. He stepped forward. I want to fix this. I want to earn back the trust I lost. I hesitated, then said softly, You can't undo 10 years with one apology. I know, he nodded, but I'm willing to spend the next 10 proving it. There was silence. Then he said something I hadn't expected. She's been suspended. My eyes widened slightly. From the company? He nodded. Internal investigation. They're reviewing the dinner incident. And someone on the board, your father, I think, recommended a temporary leadership restructure in the regional strategy department. I blinked. What does that mean? He pulled something from his pocket. A letter, neatly folded. He handed it to me. It was from the board, addressed to me. We would be honored to appoint you as Acting Director of Regional Strategy for a 6-month interim period, during which time your leadership and insight will be evaluated for permanent placement. I read the line twice. I didn't ask for this, I whispered. I know, Nathan said, but you've earned it in ways they've clearly seen, even when you didn't see it yourself. Later that evening, I met with my parents again. I showed them the letter. My father smiled. We've watched you carry yourself with more grace and strength than most executives we've ever worked with. We thought it was time to let you lead, not because of who we are, but because of who you are. My mother added, She may have had the title, but you've had the integrity. I took the job, not for revenge, not for power, but because I finally understood that I didn't have to stay in the background of someone else's story. I could write my own. Vivian, I was told, submitted a formal apology to the board and offered to mentor junior staff in hopes of regaining favor. It wasn't sincere, but by then I didn't care. She avoided me in the hallways. I let her. Nathan kept his word. He showed up more, asked questions, stood up, and most of all, listened. I didn't forget the years that came before, but I was open to seeing what came next, slowly, carefully. Because rebuilding trust isn't about sweeping the past under the rug. It's about proving in small moments that you're no longer willing to repeat it. I kept the office door open when I worked. I kept my voice firm in meetings. And when I passed Vivian in the corridor one afternoon and she looked down, pretending to scroll her phone, I didn't say anything. I didn't need to. She already knew.